Hello everybody, my name is Zen and Diablo 2 Resurrected has officially launched and I've got a lot of thoughts about it, as you might expect with a game that I typically put a lot of time into, the Diablo franchise in general, but action RPGs in general as well. So without burying the lead, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you my opinions of it, and then I'm going to get into detail about why those things happen to be the way they are in my brain for this particular game. So first and foremost, this game is a fantastic remaster. It brings to life an old title that is so pivotal in the game creation history and everything that comes after it that I think it is almost necessary for many people to play it, especially those who are interested in action RPGs. If they've never even played Diablo 2, then they're really missing out on a piece of history here. On top of that, the game is just a good game. There's a reason why it's, a classic game and why people will refer to it with such nostalgia and loving compliments. It's because back then it was a fantastic game. And then on top of that, it's just, not only are you adding great visuals and audio remaster to a game, but they also redid all of the cinematics and they're freaking fantastic. It's great. It's essentially bringing this game that is a remaster of a very, very old game, 20 years old, to a modern audience that really deserves to play it. Because, if you missed out on it, you missed out on a big chunk of history. With that said, I also think that despite it being a historical game and a game that was very pivotal to the creation of games that came after it, it also has a lot of its own issues that Diablo 2 had back in the day. Carry-on issues such as the issues of builds and build variety and gameplay and nuances between how stats work and how the player should perceive them to work, especially a new player, particularly a new player, and how in reality they work and the relation between those two things. So that's kind of my thoughts. I think it's a great remaster, but it's a remaster of a game that did we really need to go back and play? That's a question that only you as a person can answer for yourself. The fact that it is on console definitely is a huge bonus, and we're going to talk about that later. But for me, I want to start with talking about some of the remastered elements and why I like them so much. In particular, I want to talk about the graphical changes, the graphical remaster here, because when you swap between the old graphics and the new graphics, which you can freely do if you didn't know on PC by hitting G, and on console, it's some weird combination. It's like your button that you use to toggle your bar from the first and second action bar, and then it's start or something else. I don't know. You'll have to look into it. It was a weird combination on console. My point is, though, when you swap between the old graphics and the new graphics, you get the feeling that the team knew exactly how to interpret environments in the way that your brain wanted to back in the day. You see a lot of these environments, and you'll be seeing in the background here as I'm going through part of Act 2. This is footage that I intentionally chose to not spoil things, but still have things kind of interesting for players who maybe have never seen Diablo 2 and don't realize that these environments exist because they've only seen Act 1. But when you are swapping between the two, you mostly notice that there is a huge difference in all of the doodads, and doodads being things that have been added to the environment, jars and stuff like that, on walls. So you notice the difference between that and the old ones. In the old environment, a lot of that stuff just didn't exist, and they spiced it up and made the world seem so much more alive, which is ironic. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but it seems way more alive and lived in than the old game did, because in the remaster, we're able to have so much more detail in these environments and make them look way more alive and lived in. The thing is, and this is the ironic part about that, is what I'm specifically talking about is when you look at the old and new graphics, you'll notice that in the new ones, you're like, oh man, all this gore on the ground and all these bodies and stuff, this is so cool and so dark, and I love the tone that this is setting. And then you and then you switch to the old graphics and you're like, none of that, it wasn't there. Like there were some blood splotches on the ground, but it's not to the degree that, you see in the remaster. Why is that good, you might ask? Why do I find that so fascinating? Well, the reason is a little bit more complex than you might imagine, and it's actually to do with game direction. Now, I don't know this exactly, but I would put good money on it being the case that when Diablo IV was beginning development, and also when they decided to do the Diablo II remaster, that at one point they had some kind of meeting that said, okay, we need to tonally bridge these two games. We need to make sure that the new Diablo 4 that Diablo 4 is dark and gritty and gothic like Diablo 2 was, because that's like the big criticism that Diablo 3 got, is it wasn't as dark and gritty and gruesome as Diablo 2 was. And in fact, if you look at the graphical styles of Diablo 3 and Diablo Immortal, that is very clear when you compare it to Diablo 4 and Diablo 2 Resurrected. It's like a night and day difference in the darkness of the games. That's not to say that Diablo 3 and Diablo Immortal don't have dark things in them, but it is definitely a different art style. It's more World of Warcraft, less Diablo 2, if that makes any sense. The thing is, and I think this is what needs to be applauded here, is it feels like the game direction of those two games, Diablo 2 Resurrected and Diablo 4, were intentionally set in motion to be a bridge of the people who want that darker context, but also want it in a modern setting. And going back and taking Diablo 2's setting and the darker stuff that they want to recreate, and then bringing that and modernizing the look of that in a remaster does help bridge the gap between those two games, because now suddenly you're like, when you look at the environments in Diablo 2 Resurrected and then you go and you play Diablo 4, you look at the stuff in Diablo 4, you're like, oh, these are in the same world because they look the same. They are dark, they're gritty, there's gore, there's scary stuff going on in these games, and it looks very like not a place you want to live in. Not that you want to live in any place in Diablo 3 either, but you know what I mean. Like the artistical is totally not a word. The artistic choices that they've taken to make the game seem as dark and gritty as it is are very intentional, at least it seems, to again bridge that gap between Diablo 4 and Diablo 2. And to me, where this is most noticeable in Diablo 2 Resurrected is when you go and watch the remastered cinematics. Now, the old cinematics, I dare you to go watch them right after watching the new one, or maybe watch the old one first and then watch the new one. And it is stunning, the difference. They've completely rebuilt the cinematics, and they look amazing. They look so good. But what really is striking to me is when you watch the remastered cinematics and then you go watch the Diablo 4 trailer that they put out when they announced the game, and you're going, oh, okay, I can see the remaster stuff going on here. I can see the more janky models, not necessarily janky, but the where they were interpreting what the models look like in the Diablo 2 cinematics versus what the Diablo 4 stuff looks like. You can see the gap there, but you can see the tonal differences, where you're looking at the Diablo 2 stuff, and then you look at the Diablo 4 thing, and you're like, that is almost identical graphically. Like they've really nailed the same feel, the same tone. And then you go and watch the Diablo 3 cinematics, and it's not quite there. It's very bright. It's very vibrant. It's not, I would say actually one of the darkest things that they did in the Diablo 3 cinematics, spoiler alert, is when Leah becomes Diablo, and you go watch that cinematic, and that was really cool and dark, but that was like the only one. I mean, even the Malthael stuff was cool, but it was like nowhere near the level of Diablo 4. So in my opinion, the remastered stuff is most astonishing. Not that they've gone and actually made your brain remember what Diablo 2 looked like in your brain back when you played it 20 years ago. It's not that. It's that they bridged the gap between Diablo 2 and Diablo 4 tonally in a consistent way that when you go and play Diablo 4, you're going to go, this feels like it's in the same universe as Diablo 2. And I think that is a triumph. There's also something to be said about the audio remaster too. It is really nice, and switching between the old and the new on the fly, you'll notice that more often than if you're just kind of sitting there playing the new stuff. You never notice how bad or nasty like the old sound was until you actually go back and listen to it. But in comparison, the new remastered sound is really nice. It wouldn't be the same game without it, and they did a good job on it. But the thing that I think is most controversial for a lot of people, either you like it or you don't. Maybe there's a handful of people in the in-between there, but it seems to be either you like it or you don't, is the quality of life changes. So like the auto gold pickup, which is nice if you're playing on console, but you can obviously toggle that on PC, or like the shared stash, or things like, the zoom on PC and just stuff like that. Being able to, or you know, the item tags, being able to toggle that on and off, and them adding that in the beta, and then that being a pretty popular feature, or there being a clock that you can turn on. That kind of stuff is all quality of life changes, but you do have a very zealot core of people who wanted no changes and for it just to be a graphical remaster. And I get that, but nah, that's what's going to lead me into my next point is, did we really need to go back and play this game? I like that it exists. I like that people can go and play Diablo 2 who've never played it before and enjoy it in a modern setting. But I kind of also, in a weird way, like that they have to suffer through some of the really annoying quality of life stuff that doesn't exist in Diablo 2 that exists in modern titles. You know, I have examples in a moment, but it's a weird thing to me where I love this game so much, and at the same time, I hate so much of it too. I'm like, oh goodness, I wish that it wasn't this way, or I wish I could do this in the game, or like I just simply wish that that the clicking around wasn't as clunky as it is, because of course the old Diablo 2 is running beneath Resurrected, which is how they managed to get the feel and everything there. And the feel is iconic to Diablo 2, but my goodness, when you're in the level that I'm in the background, and you're trying to navigate these like weird fantastical levels, and it's really annoying sometimes because the character's moving on a grid and you just want to move more dynamically than it's just annoying, and it doesn't feel right. It's frustrating to play at times, and that's just the way Diablo 2 was, and that's an argument for keeping it the way it is, you know, try to preserve the history there. But at the same time, it's like, ooh, I kind of miss playing more modern RPGs that just move better than this. You know, with that in mind, it's kind of sad to say, but the game actually plays better with a controller than it does a keyboard and mouse. And I mean on a moment-to-moment basis in combat, like, you know, casting your abilities and moving around and attacking things. Like on a controller with the analog input, it just feels more natural than on a keyboard and mouse where you're clicking around and your character's all wonky and it doesn't quite know what to do. That being said, obviously the inventory management and stuff is way easier to do on the keyboard and mouse, but you know, if you're playing on a PC, why not switch between the two dynamically? Like, you absolutely can go and you know, play your normal gameplay on keyboard and mouse, and then when you're back in town, you can, or on controller, then when you're back in town, you can, you know, switch to keyboard and mouse and figure that stuff out. And if that's what you want to do, then that's totally up to you, because that is now an option. And I like that. I just, you know, after playing as much as I have, I'm thinking over here like, oh, I kind of want to play different RPGs. I like this. I've played Diablo 2. Not only have I played Diablo 2, but Diablo 2 was a huge part of my life when it came out and when Lord of Destruction came out. And then it continued to be a huge part of my life when I would consistently go back to it up until about 2011. And then Diablo 3 came out, and, I put a lot of time into that game, obviously. But at the same time, I didn't go back very often to Diablo 2 because the old game, it didn't look great. It didn't look great when it came out necessarily. And then after, 10, 15 years, it really didn't look great. And then there was no quality of life changes there. So it is a game that I do enjoy. I think that if you haven't played Diablo 2 before, it is definitely a must play just so you can have the historical value there. And because it is a good game with a good story. But at the same time, you do kind of have to suffer through a little bit of the annoyances. And this is an interesting thing about me and remasters, because I really like remasters. I think that on the whole, I like remasters more than remakes. But at the same time, there's something to be said about a good remake. You know what I mean? Like, I spent a lot of time as a kid playing Crash Bandicoot because that was the first game that I got on my PlayStation when the PlayStation was given to me at like Christmas or whatever it was. And then I spent a lot of time playing Spyro. And you know what? Also, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. And when those games all got their remasters, it was really nice to go back, or remakes, I should say. It was really nice to go back and play those in a modern engine with them running in a way that didn't feel super clunky, but also still maintained the memory of those games. That is a really fun thing to be able to go do, and the same thing applies for Diablo 2 Resurrected. But there's also some really huge annoyances, and my biggest one is the lack of new player friendliness that Diablo 2 inherently has. For example, for the vast majority of builds and classes, strength and dexterity are useless once you get enough of it to equip the armor that you're planning on equipping. Heck, you don't even need to really put any points into it at all for quite a long time until you like absolutely necessarily need it for a piece of gear, a specific piece of gear that you plan on wearing. But outside of that, it's like, man, go hog into vitality, and that's your life. Yeah, some classes put a little bit into energy and whatnot, but when you look at like the reason why people like Diablo 2, they go, oh, I love to be able to assign attribute points. And then you look at in reality of what they're actually doing, and if you want a viable end game build, it's not that way. You're not really assigning attribute points at all. You're just kind of dumping them into one stat, and that's that. It's kind of the argument people have against Paragon points in Diablo 3. They're like, well, once you get to a certain point, you're just dumping it all into main stat. It's like, yeah, that's why it's not good. It's the same thing here. I don't like that there isn't as much build variety in Diablo 2 as there could be. And this is what I mentioned earlier in the video, is as a new player, you're coming in and you have an expectation. You look at dexterity and you look at strength and you're like, oh yes, I'm playing assassin, I probably should put a bunch of points into dexterity, and oh, you know what, I need some into strength in order to wear these weapons too, and oh, this is really cool, I like being able to assign my points. But in reality, when you look at what the top performing builds are, or it's just not even the top performing builds, just builds that are able to do like hell or any other difficulty other than normal on a consistent basis and not just get raffle stomped, you can't really consider putting attribute points in willy-nilly. And to make this worse, you only get a handful of re-rolls or re-specs in the game by default. So you're kind of stuck with a build at a certain point, and at that point, if you haven't kind of figured it out, then you need to re-roll a character, and that's not fun. It's not fun. It's not fun to re-roll a character just because you happen to have a bad build, and that's a quality of life feature that I certainly miss from newer titles. Now, me being somebody who has an understanding of Diablo 2 is a little bit more patient with this kind of stuff because I knew what I was getting myself into, but as a new player going back and experiencing a historical title, they're going to look at that and go, why? Why is it this way? I have a handful of people I have in mind that I would love for them to play Diablo 2. People I play a lot of Diablo 3 with, or at least I have in the past, and I know that they haven't touched Diablo 2 ever, if at all. And if they jumped in, they're just gonna like facepalm at some of these choices that they had back then of, attributes and skill points and stuff. So, skill points as a concept works really well. It's a cool idea, but in reality, in actual gameplay, you're just dumping them into a very specific build, a handful of builds. I would say each class probably has about, I'm going to be really generous here, and I'm going to say it's got about 10 viable builds for endgame. And even then, the vast majority of people are not going to stumble upon those because they're kind of specific, and you kind of have to put your points in very specific places, and then at endgame have specific charms and gear, and it's a lot. There's a lot going on for the specificity of a game that has been solved, essentially. There's nothing really new here outside of being able to use ladder-only rune words in single player, which, or outside of ladder, or however they're ending up doing it, which wasn't a thing that you can necessarily do before. I don't know. There's a part of me who loves Diablo II Resurrected. I love the history. I love the game that is there. I love the remaster. It's such a good remaster. But then there's another part of me that goes, I really wish I was playing Diablo 4. And maybe that's the intention. Maybe that is why they did this. Because all of us who love Diablo 2, all of us who play this series quite often, are going to go back to this game and go, this is amazing. I love this. This is so much fun. And then after about 10 hours go, ooh, when is Diablo 4 coming out? Is this just a giant marketing thing to get us to play a new game? I mean, I'm already going to play Diablo 4, so it's not like I'm complaining, but I wonder. It definitely feels that way with the bridging of the gap of the tonal differences, the graphical changes and whatnot. It definitely makes me feel like they really want people who enjoy this game, even minutely, go, oh yeah, Diablo 2, yeah, that game that came out. It had a good remaster. I didn't play all the way through it. I got kind of frustrated with having to go back to town all the time because the inventory is so tiny, but yeah. Oh, Diablo 4? Oh yeah, you know what? If it's anything like Diablo 2, yeah, I'll play it. It's got better quality of life. Yeah, sure, I'll pick that up. Doesn't that seem kind of what this is? Isn't that kind of what's going on? At least that's what's going on with me. But the developers have mentioned offhand that they're open to adding new things to the game, whether that be stuff through seasons or whatnot. We don't know. And that has me really curious because there are a list of quality of life features that I wish they would fix because I don't like how it behaves. For example, and this is the most frustrating thing, there is so much unnecessary, friction of online play. And it has basically killed my desire to play with anybody. How just stupid is it that I have to, and I know, oh my goodness, there are a vocal minority that really love the idea of lobbies, but I hate it. Why do I have to go search a specific name of a lobby that my friend or my wife has put in to play an online game with me? It would be so much better if the Battle.net functionality was there and I could just open up my friends list and click to join their games. Wouldn't that be nice? Or they could just quick join on my games. Like, hey, I made a multiplayer game. Come join it. That would be really quite nice. And that just doesn't exist. And in fact, it's just an unnecessary thing of friction that makes me not even want to play multiplayer whatsoever. And I'm not the only one either. A lot of people are like, why is this a thing? Here's another thing. It's kind of annoying to not have individual instanced loot. Now, this is definitely a more nuanced thing that a lot of people are not going to agree with, and I totally get that. But, understand my perspective too. Imagine for a moment, just imagine that you are playing with someone that you live with, and they happen to be your spouse, and you have all of this loot on the ground that just dropped off of a boss. And you and your spouse are fairly competitive with each other and just in general. And a yellow item drops. And there's a part of you just kind of in the back of your brain that goes, it's probably good for me. I'm going to pick it up before them. So you click on it before them and then they get mad at you because you clicked it. It's just kind of annoying. It's just more unnecessary friction in my opinion. And it, once again, kind of kills my desire to play multiplayer on a larger scale. I know I could play with up to 8 people, but why do that when I have to join a lobby and I'm just gonna play single player, right? Like that's what it boils down to, and it's just kind of frustrating. I wish that if they do add more things, they consider changing and polishing out some of the rough edges a little bit more. Make the game feel less intimidating. Maybe even have a specific ladder one season that kind of changes the way stats work and make it so that it's not all just a dump stat. You know what I mean? I think that that stuff would be very interesting to see. And when you consider the fact that we're about to have our pick of the litter, because you're going to have Diablo 3 continuing with its seasons. You're going to have Diablo Immortal coming out, at least within the next 12 months. Hopefully, we'll see. If that comes out within the next 12 months, now you have Diablo 3, and then you have Diablo Immortal, which is going to get consistent updates and is free, by the way, so you can get your friends in and play it. And it's going to have controller support, so if all the people who are like, but I don't want to play on a phone, you don't have to. You can put it on a tablet or on a phone and just connect a controller to it. Look, now you're playing a mini console. You're playing on a Nintendo Switch at that point. And then now you have Diablo 3, then Diablo Immortal, and then now if there's seasonal content or ladder content for Diablo 2 Resurrected, then you have that, and then Diablo 4 comes out, and then you're going to have stuff for that, and it's that's a lot if you're a Diablo fan to keep up with. And I'm okay with them changing it up a bit. Maybe Diablo 2 doesn't do any new things. Maybe it does. But if I even jump into the game twice a year, I would be more than ecstatic to do that, as long as it's on my terms, or I'm not feeling like I'm just having to play this old game that I really like. But, I played a lot of games back in the day that I really liked. I think Black and White. Man, that was a really good game. If I tried to play that now, I'd be so frustrated by the freaking controls. GoldenEye, great example. I loved GoldenEye on the N64. I don't think I could even play it today without just throwing that stupid controller through the window. And it comes to the same thing here. Diablo 2 Resurrected is freaking fantastic. Diablo 2 is a classic game for a reason. It is amazing. But there's just those little edges here and there that make you go, should I just go play Path of Exile this ladder, the season that they're doing new cool things, and then after that jump into Diablo 3 because there's a new season coming out for that. At what point do we just leave this game in the past and let it be a game that has completely changed the future of gaming and just accept it as it was? I don't know. But I think that everybody should at one point definitely play it, because I think it is important. Just as you'll understand so many more things that game designers do nowadays just because of the decisions that were made back in Diablo 2 and how that affected a bunch of stuff. With that being said, let me know if you are playing Diablo 2. Are you playing on PC or are you playing on console? Because the fact that it is basically anywhere that you want it to be is amazing, and it opens up accessibility to a lot of people that may otherwise never have touched this game. Are you a purely console player jumping in and playing this game for the first time? I'm really curious about that. Let me know all of these details in the comments below. But with all of that being said, don't flame me too hard for my mean opinions on a game that I love. But at the same time, it's a tough love. It really is sometimes. But we shall see you guys next time.